Hi, welcome back to my channel. My dog is with me. My name is Amanda, and today we're going to be talking about the stats for the first 6 months of my reading in 2020. I'm sorry if she makes a lot of noise. She won't leave me alone right now, so we're just gonna have to do a video with her here. So I've been seeing a lot of people doing these stats videos online, and I love stats, and it's something that I just started doing in the month of June to make sure and keep myself accountable of reading as diverse as I could, but I also kept some other stats of some other things, so I thought it would be nice to update you guys on what those stats look like as of the first 6 months where I basically didn't actually pay attention to anything I was reading, and kind of see how they change in the next 6 months when I do pay attention to that kind of stuff. So I have some fun statistics to show you, but first what you doing? Really quickly, first I'm going to go over a few of the things that I wasn't able to collect for this time, but I'm really hoping I can bring to you guys next time. And it's simply because I don't have the data compiled properly for me to bring it to you, but I'm hoping in the next 6 months I can figure out a way to do that so that I can tell you all the information. So the first thing that I wish I could tell you is I don't know the number of physical books versus audiobooks versus electronic books. I haven't been keeping the numbers perfectly straight in my Excel document, so it's just jumbled, but I can tell you that the average number of pages I read per book is 326, and in total I have read 9,148 pages, whereas the average number of minutes I listen to is 715 per audiobook, and I've listened to a grand total of 46,500 minutes this year. And just a reminder, these stats are up until the end of June. I am not including anything that I read or listened to in July. I am not surprised by these numbers because I listen to a lot of audiobooks. It's just kind of an easy way for me to read my books. Now, excuse me while I try to pull up these charts for myself. So the first thing we're going to look at is going to be the thing that I am most ashamed about, and I think this is really cool because before now I thought I was doing a decent enough job, but as soon as I started tracking how much I was reading of authors of color, I was realizing that there was a problem, and that's great because now I can address the problem and start resolving it. So if you look at the first chart, I have read 12% of my books were by an author of color and 86% were not. So the mixed means that the book had more than one author and at least one person working on that project was of a different race, but you can see that that is not that great of things either. This is my number one thing that I want to be working on in the next 6 months, and I'd really like to see those numbers really close to the 50-50 mark, but honestly, I would like to see that the authors of color is higher than the white authors, because when you think about it, white authors only makes up a small amount of ethnicities. The authors' genders, once again, the both doesn't mean that they are both female and male. It means that I had more than one author working on the project and one of them was female and one of them was male. So male is 37%, which I think is really odd. I wasn't expecting this. I honestly thought that my male authors were going to be way higher because I hadn't been thinking about it either way, but I think that I have a reason for why this is once we get farther onto the video. So female is at 60%. When you break down the authors that I have read the most from Brian K. I always don't know how to pronounce his last name. Vongd? I don't know. He is the author of Paper Girls and Saga, which makes total sense why I have read the most from him. After that, I have read a lot from Shannon Maguire, J.K. Rowling, Pittacus Lore, C.S. Lewis. You're probably noticing a common thread, which is they all are authors of series, and I have been rereading or reading for the first time their book series. So that's why that is the way it is. I'd really like to beat out J.K. Rowling with a few other authors this year. That would be my goal. So this is where I think we kind of get into the breakup of why I read more female authors than male authors, and that is looking at the genres that I read. So in this category, I tried to break it up not only into like fantasy, fiction, sci-fi, horror, but also into YA, middle grade, adult. And so if it has no preface at the beginning of it, it's adult. If it has like YA, it's young adult. If it has MG, that means it's middle grade. just for you guys all to understand. I did this for myself because it's just easier for myself to break it up this way, and it allows me to see more intersectionality within my books. So if you're looking at this chart, you can see that I have basically read 35 books that are YA fantasy. So I think that is how it relates back to my authors, because most YA fantasy authors are white females. There are definitely a coming up of some authors of color, and I am definitely reading more and more of those as well, but it makes total sense that my amount of authors being 60% female is because of this. I think this is really strange because a lot of times I talk about the fact that I don't love YA fantasy. I think the reason why it's so high is because it's so easy to get through. Like, if I want to read The Shadows of What Was Lost, a book that I absolutely love and cherish with my heart and is adult fantasy, I have to spend a ton more time reading it because it's a big dang book. But if I want to sit down, you can't see it, it's down below, and read The Hunger Games, the books are very, very different in size. I can read Hunger Games in one day, and then the next day I could pick up another YA fantasy, and then the day after that. So in theory, it makes sense that I would read more YA fantasy, but it's hard for my brain to comprehend because I don't love YA fantasy, and I'd really love to break this category down into, okay, yes, I've read 35 YA fantasies, but what was the average rating I gave those 35 YA fantasies versus the average rating I gave my adult fantasy books? And just for reference on the two books that I was just talking about, not only is this one taller than that one, but like, look at that. I could put, look, am I holding The Hunger Games? You don't know. You just, it could be back here. It might not be though. I do hope to bring up my number of fantasy because I'm a piece of shit and all I want to read is fantasy in my life. But I also hope to bring up my horror genre, which is really interesting. And I am leaning towards trying to figure out a way to bring up my classics, my contemporary, and my graphic novels. I am also kind of surprised with how far up sci-fi is. I thought it would be way lower, but you know what? That's awesome. I think that this whole entire chart, even though everything that's not fantasy is super small and super short, I am surprised with how much diversity there is on here. Like, I thought I was only reading fantasy and YA fantasy and middle grade fantasy, so I'm kind of impressed with the fact that it's not all just that. I mean, it's basically like me reads anything that isn't fantasy. Oh my god, I deserve a pat on the back. Bravo, Amanda. So the next thing that I want to look at is how many times I have read each book. And so this is basically saying if I have a 1 for it, or if it's on this chart between 1 and 1.94, that means that this was the first time I read the book. Anything higher means that I had reread it a few times. So you're also going to notice on here that in the farmost right column, I have read a few books more than 8 times, and that is all referencing my Chronicles of Narnia, which I have read so many freaking times that I honestly stopped counting, but I put them all, I think, at like an 8 on Goodreads just because I needed to put a number on there. The ones that are like 3, 4, and 5 times are probably my Harry Potters, but I know that also Hunger Games is going to fall into there, Catching Fire is going to fall into there, Vicious is going to fall into that category. So there's a few books on there that I have read more than 2 times, and I definitely think that that is something that's going to grow as I continue to read because I'm always going to be coming back to my favorite books. I'm sorry I'm not looking at you, I'm trying to look at this graph. Also really interesting because I feel like I've been spending so much of my time rereading this year, and if you stack all of those rereads on top of each other, it's still not as much as I have read one time, if that sentence makes sense. I'm reading more books for the first time than I am rereading, even though I don't feel that way. How many books are in a series? I should have put this as a pie chart. Why did I not do that? Basically, almost 80 of the books that I have read this year have been from a series, whereas almost 20 of the books I have read this year have not been from a series. And that doesn't mean that I read the series, that just means it's from a series, whether or not I continue to read it. So now we are looking at how I obtained the book. So I only have one book that I finished that was an arc. I did read a few that I didn't finish, and I wrote really small reviews back to the publishers and let them know why I wasn't the best person to be reading those books. I'm making noises. I also have read almost 20 books from Scribd, which is interesting because I've only had Scribd for a few months now. I don't know exactly how many months, and I am going to be canceling my membership very soon because I got access to Overdrive by paying through a different library than my own, because my own personal library doesn't have Overdrive. So that is going to be something that you're going to see pop up, that I'm not keeping Overdrive separate from the library. I'm going to be having Overdrive as part of the library category. Borrowed means that I either bought the book or was given the book and then I didn't like it, so I returned it or gave it to someone else or thrifted it back to, I have a thrift store that will let you trade in books, just so you guys know what that little weird category looks like. Library, I'm really glad that this category is close to 25. I have been really making an effort this year to go to the library at least once a month. I was going twice a month before the pandemic hit, and then since April I haven't physically been to my library except one time. So that makes me really sad because I was doing such a good job reading from them, but it is what it is. We weren't expecting this pandemic to hit, and part of my 2020 goal was to read a library book every single month, and I have done that even through the pandemic, so that's great. Owned is close to 50. That honestly kind of surprises me, but then again, it shouldn't, because I'm rereading a lot of books that I already owned. I should break this down into books that I had already owned and already read, and into ones that I had just bought for this year. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the category that I think is the most interesting, and that is my rating category. So as you can see on here, it's a little bit wonky. So anything from like a 5 to a 5.5 means that I rated it a 5. It doesn't mean that I rated it above a 5, just for your reference. So if you're looking at the column, look at the number like down into the left of it to understand what I rated it. So on average, I rated books 3.7688, which is higher than my Goodreads average. So that means technically this year I have read more positively than I had in the past, and I think that is all down to the fact that I am rereading favorites from my past, so I'm automatically going to rate them higher even if they don't deserve it, because I feel nostalgic for them. So as you can see, the most common that I rated a book was 5 stars, and I think that is absolutely insane, unheard of. What? It's because I have been rereading Harry Potter, and I kind of kept all their ratings the same because I didn't want what J.K. Rowling is saying to affect my enjoyment of the book. I wanted to keep them separate, especially since I never once bought any of my Harry Potter books. They were all bought for me or thrifted or given to me. Also, if I could put like my 4.5s on top of my 4s, or my 3.5s on top of my 3s, I think they would technically be higher than my 4s, but I break books down like that. So a lot of books got 3s, only a few books got 1s, and no books got 1.5s. Anyways, that is the breakdown of my statistics for the year 2020, the first half of the year. I love watching these videos online, and I love statistics, so I hope you guys enjoy this too. I feel like even though I'm at the end of this video, there was something else I wanted to say and I'm not thinking of it, so if I did, editing Amanda will jump in right here. Otherwise, thank you all for watching. Let me know what you thought of this. I guess there's no books to talk about, but let me know what you thought of your stats, and please tell me your stats or link to your stats video if you have one. And in the meantime, I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you all in the comments. Bye!